President, I rise to join my colleagues this afternoon in asking, is this just another Thursday? Is this just another afternoon in a week, in an average year, in an average August, when it's fine for all of us to simply head to our other commitments and concerns? And you know, sometimes, Mr. President, here in Washington, it's awfully easy to feel and be disconnected from the daily concerns, from the grinding anxiety, from the pressing issues that make the lives of the folks we represent so difficult. I want to start by reminding us of something a senator from Minnesota once said in the 1970s. It was Hubert Humphrey. He said, "The moral character of a society can best be gauged by how they treat those at the dawn of life, its children, those in the shadows of life, the disabled, the disadvantaged, and those in the twilight of life, senior citizens." Well, if that were the measure of this place and this day and this time, then we are failing. I think every person here, every person listening or watching knows we are in the midst of three crises at the same time. A global pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, in which a highly transmissive disease has spread rapidly across the world. Many other nations have gotten ahead of it, have managed it, have stabilized it, but here in the United States, we have failed to get our arms around it, to stop it, and to deliver the coordinated resources and supplies needed to give some confidence, some positive direction in our public health infrastructure, in our schools, in our senior skilled nursing centers, in our communities. It has gotten away from us. More than 150 million Americans have died so far, and states that thought they had it well under control are seeing it reemerge, and states that early on saw no impact are seeing record deaths and infections. And coming right on the heels of it, a recession deep and sharp in the last quarter, a nearly 40% drop in our GDP, the sharpest since we began recording that. And then third, a renewed focus on inequality in our country. We have seen, because of this pandemic and recession, and because of the brutal killing of George Floyd, a reminder of the ways in which we are unequal in our access to health care, our access to opportunity, our access to housing. So that's the environment that we are in. Several months ago, Mr. President, we all came to this floor and unanimously voted, in this bitter and divided partisan time, we unanimously voted to deliver $2.3 trillion in assistance and support that sent checks to individual Americans and families, that sent checks to those who were newly unemployed, that sent support for small businesses at risk of going under, that sent support to state and local governments, that sent support to hospitals. It was the single largest spending bill since the Second World War. And some reminder of just the seriousness, the gravity, and the scale of this challenge. And 2 months later, the House of Representatives took up and passed the HEROES Act, another $3 trillion to provide support across many of those same areas. And for weeks, this body, the majority, failed to act, to propose an alternative, to take it up and examine it, to send something back, to put something on the table. It was just this Monday, the 27th of July, that we got to see the answer. And that answer fails to meet this moment. I'm from a small state of Delaware, state below 1 million people. And our Department of Labor since March has received over 130,000 claims for unemployment. In a state of less than 1 million, more than 1 in 10 Delawareans have filed for unemployment assistance. We have had huge challenges delivering all over our country the assistance we voted on months ago. Out of that 130,000, 27,000 of them are still waiting to get their unemployment checks. My office and other offices in our delegation are helping hundreds of individuals and families who've called, who've emailed, who've texted, who've reached out for help. And yet, this body, through inaction, allow the additional $600 a week in unemployment insurance that has sustained so many families to expire. Because we can't work out a simple agreement on how severe this moment is, on how deep the need is, and on what the right path forward is. When I talk to my governor, my mayor, my county executive in my home state, my city, my county, one of their biggest needs is for additional support for state and local governments. There is robust support in the HEROES Act sent over by the House, $875 billion. That's a lot of money. There is nothing in the HEROES Act presented this Monday. And why? So far, 1.5 million public employees, public servants, state, county, local employees have been laid off. And some folks I hear on television talking about this speak as if they are faceless bureaucrats in gray buildings. But they're teachers, they're paramedics, they're nurses in county hospitals. They're the folks who administer these unemployment claims. They are the folks who help support small businesses. They are the folks who help make sure that our water is drinkable, that our parks are mowed, that our libraries are functional, and that our schools can open safely. This moment is the tale of two worlds. A world in the House of Representatives that says we are in a crisis and an emergency. And when the American people see a challenge this big, this deep, they often look to our federal government for the resources that will make it possible for their state, for their county, for their community, for their hospital, for their school, to get through it. And here there's been a resounding silence for weeks. I hear week in and week out from parents, from teachers, from paraprofessionals, anxious. How are our schools going to reopen? What's the plan? Where are the resources? What are the details? How do we get testing? How do we get personal equipment, personal protective equipment? Even now, there's conversations urgently going on in my home state about how and when and where we'll be able to reopen. When it comes to childcare, millions of Americans are unable to return to work because there isn't support for childcare. And when it comes to small businesses, thousands have closed their doors. Thousands more are at risk. We will not get through this unless we can pull together and deliver a sustained and meaningful response. So to my colleagues and friends, I don't know where the rest of our colleagues are. I don't know what they're hearing, but I know what I'm hearing from my constituents in Delaware. The way they make sure, Mr. President, that we don't get disconnected from our home when we're here in Washington, boy, they text, they email, they call, they post on social media. Some even still write good old-fashioned letters. And the thousands of letters and emails and comments that I got in the first few weeks of this pandemic and recession motivated this entire body to vote unanimously on the CARES Act, one of the biggest moments of federal assistance in our nation's history. So what's going on now? Why the lack of focus? Why the sense this is just another Thursday afternoon? Well, let me read to you for a few minutes from a few of the folks who've reached out to me from my home state. Christine in Wilmington lost her job now months ago. She is a single mother. She's raising a 12-year-old son. She got just one unemployment insurance check. She has been barely hanging on and ultimately had to sell her car to buy groceries. She sent me a message painful in its focus on the urgency of there being an additional $600 in federal aid. She has no job prospects in sight. The $1,200 stimulus check that came from the CARES Act months ago and that one unemployment insurance check so far has been critical to keeping food on the table and the lights on and a roof over their head for her son. She's just one of millions of Americans right now, wondering what it's going to take to get this body to put down the tools of partisanship and work together. Some folks say, well, why don't you just go back to work? Study out from the Department of Labor says for every 4 unemployed Americans, there's only 1 job that is even posted. And there's others who cannot work because of their family circumstances. A husband and wife from Millsboro, who are senior citizens, reached out to me. The wife wants to go back to work. She has an opportunity to go back to work. But her husband has a serious chronic condition, a lung disease. And she is terrified of going back to work, catching COVID, and infecting her husband in a way that would lead to his death. They've also relied on this additional unemployment, the $600 a week, which if it runs out, they will have to make very hard choices. She wants to work, but she wants to protect her husband. A friend of mine, Jeff, runs a small candy store on Rehoboth Beach. This time of year, it would normally be just humming with clients and customers, folks stopping in for Snyder's Candy, a great small business. Business is down 50%. He applied for it, and he got one of those PPP loans in the CARES Act, but he received just $9,000. Far too little to keep everyone on his payroll to stay fully open, and he is waiting to see if we will work together to come up with a compromise, with a next step, with a next round of loans. Another person, a woman, Sherry, who runs a daycare in Wilmington. Small daycare in her own home, has 6 families whose children she cares for. Even if she's able to reopen fully and safely, she's heard from those 6 families, only 2 of them are coming back. So she's going to have to close her business, which means she loses her wages and the families lose childcare. She has seen firsthand that parents can't go back to work if they don't have childcare. There's funding for childcare in the House bill, so far none in the Senate bill. And Robert, a man from Newark, Delaware, he works in the entertainment industry. One of the areas hardest hit is the small stages, the entertainment venues that are so important to the vibrancy of our communities and our culture. He's been relying on unemployment to pay his bills, that extra $600 a week. Robert's message to me, quote, "When the stimulus runs out, where do I turn? Do I have my vehicle repossessed? Do I not pay for food, or do I not pay my mortgage? I have no prospects of being reemployed. I've worked my entire life, and I'm ready to get back to it as soon as there is a direction we can follow. My unemployment is not my choice," Robert said. "It is an unfortunate byproduct of not taking this virus seriously enough from the beginning of the pandemic." The publisher of a storied local newspaper in Sussex County shared with me a story that once their PPP funds were exhausted, they had to lay off 20% of their full-time staff, half of their contract employees. And he said, quote, "The uncertainty in regard to the economic condition over the next few months weighs heavily over all of us here at the Cape Gazette and our industry as a whole. The loss of local news will be devastating to our community and across the country." Mr. President, I can see that I've got colleagues eager to join me in these remarks on the floor, so let me bring this to a close. One of the moments this became most real for me was when the Delaware Food Bank partnered with the Delaware National Guard to provide supplemental food for Delawareans. It was out at the Christiana Mall just off of I-95. Huge parking lot. The mall, of course, closed. And this was early on in the pandemic. We thought we'd see dozens, maybe 100 households line up in their cars to get some extra food, much of it from federal sources. The line went all the way around the mall. Hundreds and hundreds of Delawareans, people who later commented either on radio or letters to the editor that they never thought they'd be in a food line. Not since the Great Depression have the food banks of this nation seen lines as long and made up of as diverse a background and groups asking for, eager for, willing to accept, hoping for support for them and their families. This year alone, 50,000 Delawareans have turned to our food bank so that they can put food on the table for their families. I don't know what my colleagues are reading, what emails they're getting, what calls they're answering, what texts or posts on social media are moving them. But I know that the Delawareans who've reached out to me have shared with me the pain of 150,000 Americans who've died, have shared with me the anxiety and concern about how schools and businesses will reopen, and have asked, when will we do our job? And work across the aisle, find responsible compromise, and support our nation in this moment of crisis. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.